Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the place you are connecting from. Welcome to our CDEP talk from compliance to confidence, real application security for several standards. Today, we are focusing on a shift that is redefining how organizations approach to application security. The growing pressure to prove compliance through real implementation and not just the documentation. In the last year, more than 70% of the organizations in the regulated sectors have reported undergoing some form of technical assessment tied to frameworks such as ISO 27001, NIST, DORA, and NIST 2. Also, the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe rolls out, and the software vendors across the European Union will need to demonstrate secure development process by design and providing evidence. What we are seeing in this regulatory evolution is not enough with the declaration that we are following some secure practices, and we must show how our pipelines, our tools, and our teams enforce them. For example, under DORA, they are requesting some evidence about code changes, testing, risk approvals. In other standards, we need to show how we keep the SBOMs updated, how the vulnerabilities are managed through the lifecycle of the development. At the end, application security teams are not only required what are the policies that you are applying or you have. They need to demonstrate and to prove that those policies works and are implemented inside our pipelines and the infrastructure. To explore this in depth today, I'm joined by two fantastic experts here. Andres Galarza, welcome, Andres. Thank you very much. He's founder and principal consultant at Galarza and Nobody, and brings a lot of experience from the public and the private sectors, helping organizations to implement practical, reproducible security controls aligned with these standards, NIST and HIPAA. He has led initiatives at several banks and worked with the United States Navy and NIST RMF adoption, and is one of the OWASP leaders in the Barcelona chapter. Welcome, Andres.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Pleasure
much
to be here.
for being here. Fantastic. And we have also, we count on Daniel, Dan, that is the principal cloud security architect at the global system integrator, and helps also enterprises to scale cloud and DevSecOps security across all these regulated environments. He colleagues was at Frankfurt and contributes to the Cloud Security Alliance and works very close with other teams to bridge these frameworks like ISO and NIST into real-world controls. Thank you very much, Dan, and welcome also.
Thank you, Jesus, and looking forward for the chat.
Okay. As usual, feel free to contribute, to say anything you consider. And of course, if anyone in the audience share any questions or ask something, I'll try to put in the moment, or maybe if not, we answer all of them at the end of the session anyway. Okay. So let's start. First point, we were mentioning that the compliance is not just that we are changing, and it's now a necessity. The way we demonstrate is not nice to have. We need to implement the compliance in this because of this regulation, both in the European Union, like NIST 2, DORA, and the Cyber Resilience Act that is coming now. Okay, with several examples, not only how we retain documents, how we have the proofs of doing the scans, and how we keep the evolution of the SBOMs, a lot of different things. In the States, is more or less the same. We have executive orders, and we have other forms from the White House, for example, and the CISA Secure by Design guidelines. So at the end, a lot of different frameworks, regulations, and at the end, the key question is, we have this gap between what the paper or the theory requests and how we implement, how to move from the policy to the practice and to the way to demonstrate. I don't know who wants to start. Probably Andres, for example. You have been working with the organizations very, very close and different standards. How do you see this connection between the paper and the policy that we have been written and the auditors or the assessors expecting in the real world when they check the practice?
Sure. Just before diving in, I just want to say thanks again, Jesus. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you and Dan. So here's what I have run into from a kind of paper versus practice in terms of the gaps that I see both in my clients and with previous employers that I've been with. So I come from vast majority of my professional experience is in the United States. Recently moved to Barcelona in Spain. And so a lot of my experience is more well-versed in some of kind of what audits and regulation and compliance looks like from a US lens as opposed to a European lens. But a lot of these things obviously apply on both sides of the ocean. But I think maybe kind of as a foundational statement to make, I think sometimes a lot of folks who are going through an audit or who are looking to kind of turn policies into something more kind of usable, forget that kind of both auditors and people who are not in their specific roles are people too, and don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of their roles as well as they do. And in my experience, the easier you make life on an auditor or regulator, or even just frankly anyone outside of maybe the engineering team or the development team, your ability to explain what's going on in your portfolio is critically important. So I'll give you an example of where kind of paper versus practice gaps that I've encountered. I worked for an AppSec organization where, based on the criticality of the defect or vulnerability that we would find in a piece of code or in an asset or application, the team would have X number of days to remediate it, right? Like maybe 7 if it's a critical defect, all the way through 30 or longer, potentially, if it wasn't as critical. If you don't have a system in place, and let's just say that the policy, it did say this, the AppSec policy says you must address or kind of fix these defects or vulnerabilities within that time period. If you don't have a good book of record on the assets that you have, if you don't have something to track all of the open issues that you have, that can't be side of desk work, regardless of the size of the organization. So if you don't have a ticket queue showing that these CVEs have been triaged or that there is a risk rating system or a risk management kind of system in place, then you're going to kind of quickly run into issues when someone who's not in that role, who's not intimately familiar with the organization, starts asking you kind of really pointed questions on, well, why was it not resolved? How are you tracking what needs to be? How are you prioritizing? Things of that nature. So hopefully that kind of gives you an example of where you need to be able to have these organizational systems in place to go and not just your team manage internally.
So it's more or less the system where you call the system is some support or some mechanisms to have the things under control, in order, and to some mechanisms to automate several things, right? Regarding,
exactly so.
First of all, you have mentioned something important, the inventory. That is okay, at least to know what you have to monitor, all the assets you have there, and all the things to start then, and assessment then to see the security point of view. Yep. Great. Couple of ideas from this point. Dan, your view, according to your experience, for example, it's complementary. What signals do you see that the compliance is reshaping, is changing how the large enterprises approach to this application security? For example, regarding Cybersecurity Resilience Act, is going to change something else, or is more or less the same? What's your view on this?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jesus. And just also touching basically what Andres was talking about regarding, paper versus practice-based, and having, first of all, understanding your inventory and asset management. Just from my background, I do a lot of work in the EU and also across Europe. So what I've seen is basically what we've seen across customers. Basically, there's big changes with EU directives like the Cyber Resiliency Act, driving application security programs driven by CRA, but also things like DORA, if it comes to financial services, and also NIST 2, especially in critical infrastructure providers. So, you talk about the CRA. So things like, also Andrew mentioned, like having, secure coding policies in place, in like vulnerability management, responsible disclosure, and incident reporting. So, and actually one of the most important points that we've seen with CRA is driving big changes are SBOM, software bill of materials. Understand, again, your inventory and asset management, where you all have the dependency. And I think just really that sort of the shift that we see from document-based policies to really proper automated pipeline enforcement. Large organizations they're just writing a policy and then just put it on the shelf and wait until an auditor comes around and reads it. Those times are gone. I've been an auditor in an organization. I've been in the seat where it's like, as your policy, then they give it the paper and it hasn't been updated for like 2 years, and it's just not really applicable to what actually is. So the auditors really want to see, and regulators really want to see what's in action. So as an example, I worked with a financial service, a fintech provider in the German market that also, and that's part of regulation of CRA, to actually have secure by design initiatives as soon as the CRA was announced. So we actually started requiring evidence like metrics, logs, through things in your automated pipeline, like running scan results, code review logs for every release, and tracking that, and then storing this in a sort of a central repository that auditors can use, or at least the security team can use that to actually access those audit evidence. Another point that I've seen a lot with the clients I work with, especially in financial services, is top-level visibility, top-down security. And instead of like board executives asked 5 years ago, can we prove our apps are secure? Actually, this is more important, thinking, are we just secure? Right? So they get more specific. Now, can we prove? It's really the evidence that you have to provide. So basically, AppSec is a boardroom topic, right? Now, when you look at the timelines for CRA, so it's already enforced, but the fines will roll in 1 or 2 years. So it's really important to actually have to have your AppSec practice into a must-have audit-ready process. So really focus on the outcomes and process-based, and really focusing on how to comply with the regulation, but actually build the automation into your compliance program that auditors will understand as well as your developers. So bridging the gap, essentially.
Okay. Fantastic. I think 2 important things: automation and this central repository to store everything that could be part of this system that Andres has mentioned before. Because at the end, actually, the standard say what you have to do, but doesn't explain how to implement it. DORA is the perfect sample for this, because you have to do this, but even it's completely open for small companies, for large enterprises, it's completely open, so you can adapt. So at the end, when the teams start considering the implementation, it opens a huge amount of different alternatives for storing the code reviews, automate the test, and that is linked to the commit in the SCM, for example, those kind of things. For the system, Andres mentioned before, new workflows for triage, for the remediation timelines, to measure everything and to have everything automated with these new workflows. Usually, the Git propose or provide some support, but at the end, the idea is, or the problem is, how we can integrate all these controls in the software development lifecycle in the different stages, because we have the code development, the build, the delivery, the testing, the different changes. You have mentioned this central repository event, but usually in the companies there are a lot of different tools in spread across the different stages, different teams. So the challenge here is, okay, central repository, different tools, different way of working in the different teams. How we can put together, or how we can connect this this in the practice?
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, because it is really finding a common, consistent format, right? That auditors and developers can speak, right? Something that is like a standardized format that you can actually use, right? So what we built is actually, the thing is, like, agreeing, like in one of those, the customer work with in the bank, is finding really a common standard like standard output format, like JSON or YAML, where you can actually output the evidence into, however you want to call it, like security data lake, or a shared repository, essentially, you can query, right? And then agreeing on, like, okay, whatever you do in terms of your tools, whatever tool, GitHub, GitLab, Jenkins, whatever you're using, we expect that sort of output format, and then we use this into our governance, risk and compliance solution, like into our sort of a board level dashboard. So the GRC solution that actually then builds some really fancy like dashboards, and then use this as sort of the backbone as communication for auditors. Because if an auditor comes in, you don't want to sit down for weeks and then have him read through the documents and collecting evidence, because it's like evidence collection is a pain, right? It's a big pain. And if you just have the auditor sitting with you in the room and showing, and so it's like, this is the evidence, like you give him a demo of what you're actually doing. Like, look, this is how we check vulnerabilities in the security scanning process before deployment and after deployment. So that actually impressed a lot of auditors that I work with, being able to show them, lead them by showing what you already have, instead of being chased by like collecting evidence manually, which just doesn't work in 2025 anymore, especially if you talk about cloud native environments where things just spin up and shut down very quickly. Again, it's very standardized, consistent format, and then sort of taking the auditor at the hand to really show them and lead with your evidence, and of course follow up and make sure you have documents that actually have all that, not like tons, but actually documented processes that an auditor can understand, but then also the automated backup, or the automated evidence to back up that process.
Yeah, maybe just to jump on a quick point that Dan said, because I think it's really important, just to bring it out, like beyond the technical level, just like I really appreciate. I'm not an auditor. I've worked with a lot of auditors. A lot of my friends are auditors, but I'm not an auditor. But I really would want to emphasize what Dan said about, like, approach it as like a relationship where the easier you make the work on the auditor, and I understand that these are sensitive conversations where the organization has every incentive to be very defensive and not say more than you absolutely have to, but treating these people like human beings who are intelligent, who may have been working in the field that they are actually now auditing, and who know what's up, and kind of coming to it from a place of respect, and the easier as long as your story makes sense and you have the evidence in place and you treat them like a human being, those conversations tend to go well in terms of what you can expect and hope for in terms of going through an audit. So I just really like the point that Dan made.
And Andres, thank you for this conversation. That you have defined or identified different sets of evidence during these assessments to implement this. What are the usual evidence that are more suitable for implementing this? Or I don't know if there is some evidence that has surprised you because you were not expecting that the evidence was valid and or something new. Just for according to your experience, what are the usual evidence that works best for ISO, NIST, DORA? They always work. This always works, for example, or something like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, Dan also kind of mentioned, he mentioned like a JSON file or something along those lines. So like, not being, I worked in really large financial services organization with over 100,000 employees. So, even within that environment where there's been a way of doing things and it's Microsoft Office documents moving back and forth via email, there's spaces to innovate. Something, maybe starting at a really high level, something that might seem silly, but it was an organization that had a chat platform that was used internally by employees, and this chat platform had a way of requesting approvals. So as opposed to moving away, and a tailor-made, already built into the chat platform way of time-stamped approvals with the ability to attach evidence and stuff like that, that's going to make someone who's coming from outside the team really easy. You don't have to track down emails and kind of ensure that you're including only the parts of the email chain that you want to. Like, it's really straightforward, right? So using the tools that are in the environment to kind of make your life easier, and also, how can I make this easier to understand for someone who's not me or someone who's outside my team? Maybe a last example that comes to mind is. So maybe just to flesh out a little bit more of the thing that Dan was mentioning. So like, an attestation, a build attestation file. So a signed JSON file with like the commit ID, the AppSec test results, the builder identity, like to establish kind of ownership and that chain of custody, and if you build this into your DevSecOps program or your CI/CD kind of pipeline, you don't have to then go back and kind of organize your work. You can just have it be part of the output of your normal everyday working processes. So just maybe thinking about how can I make this easier to explain using the tools that I use on a regular basis, rather than this has to be some poor GRC analyst that comes back and comb through a bunch of emails or Excel documents or something along those lines. Because anytime you want to automate as much of it as possible, so you don't have yourself open to human error that's going to happen because of the nature of these things. So those are that approval mechanism built into a already in-house chat platform, or using something in your DevSecOps pipeline to show that you are following what the policy says that you have to do, are some ways of thinking about evidence collection that would make your life easier and the auditors easier.
Yeah. So just to try and touch on this, what you said, like having verifiable evidence in place. So some things like having like a build artifact or an attestation file to actually show the auditor, like, look, this is what we're doing, and having this sort of in a way that you can't modify it, like that, like an internal person, or if somebody backs and sorry, I just approved the merge. Like, no, this is actually something you have to be, you have to be an admin to do this, or at least this is basically part of every commit, and you can't change the file, right? So again, it's just having this like the modification of basically tamper resistant file. And I think just to mention, like things like Salsa. So that's a really good framework software for supply chain security. So that sort of gives you some guidance, and there's a lot of guidance, of course, but I think this found it really helpful to actually build and understand, okay, what is your attestation, what is your provenance. And actually, this actually translates to a lot of the, because it also works a lot with large language model security, it translates into AI world, because a lot of those things, you want to make sure what goes into your model and what goes out of your model, like you don't know what's going inside, is actually verifiable. So a lot of those things that we talk about also apply to AI, into securing large language models when it comes to having auditor evidence ready, right? Because just make sure that whatever you logging is possible, is basically can be consumed by an auditor, and doesn't make and is not being modified or tampered with. So again, a lot of options to do here, but just having this as an outcome in place.
Thank you very much. Two surprises for me in this point. The chat approvals, because you have to do the screenshot to store it. It's not
Yeah.
It's not very automatic, but it works actually. In the ISO 27001, for example, is one of the evidences, right? And the other is done this bill attestations, the salsa provenance or in total attestations. That is the other a bit more advanced format, because it's actually not very extended. Not very people knows about these mechanisms and these capabilities in. A lot of platforms don't have these capabilities, so it's something that we show, we tell to our customers. In the States, it's true that it's a bit more advanced, but here is quite new, the application of this mechanism. So it's really interesting that we are considering now this approach. Well, we have talking about the system and introducing this inventory, this mechanism, this central repository, and store things there. But now we have to automate how we gather this evidence and we put everything in the repository. So it's okay. We have the policy, different policies, how we implement them. We have mentioned the chat to have one of them, for example, but usually these policies are in the place where we build the software, like the bill attestation. They are in the pipeline, in the flow that gather all the components, build, integrate, and deliver to the next stage, and this kind of thing. So there we have a lot of different things. We usually, or we should apply them before approval the merge to the default branch or to the final, in order to ensure that we only include the changes after or that are compliant with the corporate security policy. That is, I think, Real security gate, I don't know. And we have to do all these checks in an automatic way. We know about the policy as code. That is a way to simplify and to integrate these things. But at the end, the idea is to generate this log, these attestations, and these things without slowing the pipeline, because at the end we have the agility to deliver as soon as possible the new functionalities and don't delay the process of the deployment and this kind of thing. So, Andres, for example, what do you think, or in the startups, for example, that the people has less knowledge about the security and less experience? How do you support them to establish these light mechanisms or these controls that are still adequate for comply with the standards? And how do you support, or do you think that is best to embed these policies in these pipelines?
I mean, I tell my clients that look for opportunities to ensure that the engineering team or the development team and management or leadership are on the same page in terms of what the goal or the objective is of what we're trying to do here, so that there's not at least it starts to address kind of like the cultural divide of the security is going to get in the way of me being able to move quickly, yet from a leadership perspective or from an executive perspective, there's a compliance element to some of these businesses and some of these industries where it's they can't have certain failures happen, or there's a risk to the health of the business, or the reputation of the business. Guardrails and not speed bumps in terms of using that kind of terminology. An example that comes to mind. For a branch, it's a one-page kind of branch rules. So if it's a two-person review, automate the security scan and be able to electronically sign it. This means if you understand, if you make the engineers understand, hey, or make them feel that like the merge won't happen unless the basics are there, like that this is kind of a green check flex across the board. they won't have to go into a meeting to explain this to someone, and it just kind of cuts out on the explanation time. I think that's a way of getting engineering and development on your side for understanding why these policies are being enacted, or why they're being put into place in their pipeline. And this kind of touches on the leadership concern where we're not going to be doing as much rework, having to go back and address things that have been raised at one of these meetings. And it gives, to touch on the theme of the discussion, it gives auditors a single kind of time-stamped trail that they can follow and understand. Also, I found success in this. I'm a technical writer by training and education. I like documentation. I'm a policy nerd. So making sure that when you're authoring these policies, they have to make sense. Use plain language, make them easily digestible and understand them, and put them in the context of even the pipeline if you have to. Like, you can't have open ports, and if you're looking at something, it makes it easier. The engineer can say, okay, I'm just going to edit a text file, and then raise a pull request, and then it's all part of my workflow. And then finally, again, from like the leadership perspective, these policy changes are traceable and in a version control platform. And I know that if I make it easy, my engineers or my team won't then go and do some sort of shadow IT where there's some sort of outside of the way that I want them to be doing it. They have their own way of tracking these things, which makes it, again, it takes away from that single traceable process you can then hand over to an auditor.
Thank you very much, Andres. Important thing to put everybody in the same page, because of the awareness on the relevance of the security and the relevance about not allowing certain things, despite that we need to launch something. And I'm product manager, I know what I'm talking about. But yes, at the end is this is the focus. Then in the large enterprise or more corporate, the challenge is more or less the same. But in the small medium company, okay, the size of the team is smaller, is more concentrated in one product, for example, or a few of them. The communications usually flows easier across all the different teams, or the team is more integrated. But in the large enterprises, is okay. We have our silos, development, QA, security, different directors, and the challenge is the same, but probably the receipt is different.
Exactly, and I think that the core part here, the main challenge is scaling. So just to give you some numbers, like like a couple of years back, not sure if that still holds true, but it's basically 100 developers, up to 10 DevOps engineers, up to 1 AppSec person. In any case, we're outnumbered, right? So, and especially in large enterprises, like I worked in like regulated industries where you had hundreds of developer teams, you had many like infrastructure development, like developer teams, and maybe 2 or 3 different types, like basically 1 AppSec team and then 1 SOC. So that just doesn't scale. So what you need to make sure, especially in enterprise settings, so very similar to what Andres touched on, is really nail this down, moving over the policy as code as a central element to you, basically in a central repository as your core strategy for driving enforcement. So for example, what we did in a big global bank is actually had a large cloud environment, actually had all the 3 large cloud providers, AWS, Microsoft, and Google, in place, but actually having a central repository where you store all your rules, all your policies as code that you can actually enforce. Like, for example, no open ports, right? That could be on a paper, but if it's on the paper and somewhere like nobody cares, right? You actually want to make sure it's real-time enforcement, and that's what came. There's like native guardrails that you can use, a third-party products. Basically, having a central repository in place where you codify that and store them, and then apply them to all sorts of environments. If it's even Kubernetes environments, if it's throughout the secure different kind of programming languages, but basically having a baseline of checks, and preferably that baseline. That's another things that we did, is mapping them back to your high-level standards, like to DORA, to ISO 27001, to NIST 2. So sort of having a reference to why you're doing this, right? Because if an auditor comes around, it's like, oh, what do you actually have this policy in place to ensure that? So, yeah, actually we have it, and in the repository, look, it's actually a comment, like there's a mapping back. So there's a lot of tools and solutions that provide a sort of automated way, but quite often, like, it's more having this in a central location instead of 5. So, and again, scalability is because if we update a rule somewhere, we do it in one place, and all the teams prefer to pick it up. And a very important thing, and also, Andre, probably you've seen, is sort of security teams are moving into more like, we're building a product for a developer to consume, something consumer like the prototypes approach. So this is a very core in large enterprises, where you want to have a sort of self-service platform for policies, for guardrails that actually developers can consume. Because quite often what I've seen is, if you make things too difficult in security, people are just going to avoid you, right? It's like, oh yeah, that's just like, I can't deploy this. This always have to go through 3 risk approvals, and I'm not going to do that, right? So you want to make sure that this is consumable, and actually, it actually goes into the developer workflow. So I really like what you said with the speed bumps, not a gate that's like, oh, I'm just going to walk around the gate, right? So that's what it helps, is like, central repository and a dashboard. So we see things traceable and where things actually happen, and again, focusing more on the outcomes that you can provide. So I think the policy as code is one of the key elements for large enterprises, and centralizing this, of course, like quite often large enterprises actually have different subsidiaries, so they have different security teams. So sort of bringing this together where possible, and if not, providing like something like an API or something can consume, like to actually include this in your central policy enforcement system. Right? It's easier said than done, especially for providers, but it does do a lot of magic once you get to do this. And like things like having tags on your cloud assets and just using that just to drive automation is one of big step forward.
Andres agrees with you. So fantastic. So okay. So now we have integrated in the pipeline the check for you have enabled, and you are forcing that the approval of the pull request has been reviewed by a colleague. The commit is signed. You cannot force a push to the, and then you have also the analysis for analysis for SCA. You have in the pipeline all the reports, the results, and all the checks that saying, I don't know if the JSON, as you mentioned before, Dan, or whatever. I have everything that I pass this, and I have these checks and the result, okay, no okay, or whatever. And then I can put it not in a salsa provenance, because I cannot add these materials to that part, but in total attestation, for example, I can include all these reports and all this information as I need. The thing is, okay, now you have introduced something before, Dan, or I think Andres also in the second point, okay, I generate all these things, but when I have all different or very different tools, probably each team or each pipeline could generate the evidence in different formats. So if we have to implement this, you have mentioned, okay, it doesn't care the tool, but the format of the evidence has been a JSON or a CSV or whatever. But then we have also to implement this repository. I can say, okay, everything is stored in the pull request, and everything is stored there as a comment or whatever. Or I can count on a solution that ASPM or all-in-one solution that aggregates everything and provide these dashboards and the download of the evidence and all these things. Or I can a third approach that is the in-house, a solution in-house that I select, I don't know, any data warehouse, and I put everything there, and then I build my dashboards on top of that with any solution. Okay. From these three alternatives, or any other one that you consider, what's your view or your recommendation, or what is more suitable for each type of enterprise, whatever? What's your experience in this way?
Maybe I can start with just sure. What I've seen is most CISOs and security teams, they have too many tools, right? There's like overburden of tools, and vendors like, oh, use this, and then you have like 1,600 different tools. They all sort of do one thing, but then try to do many things, and sort of platformized approach. So and what I said back, focus on the outcomes, the process. What do you want to achieve, right? I want to have a single source of truth that I can query. So what I've seen customers creating a lot is this sort of security data lake architecture. So cloud providers have their own sort of offerings for data lakes or for security lakes. But actually, in the end, you really have to think about what does your business need, right? What's the kind of information and how do you query it? So I would say there's no one fits all solution, but actually think about, okay, what are your sort of requirements, and build your basically your security architecture around that traceability and auditability that you can use then to get the required evidence. And of course, having sort of a blueprint for certain regulations, like we talked about the CRA, NIST 2, DORA, ISO 27001. So all of those things, especially comes to things like ISO 27001, they've been around for a while. So a lot of those ASPM tools, Jesus, that you mentioned, they support this quite out of the box. But there's then also certain things like internal policies that you actually have to also create and customize. So that's where, from my perspective, we actually have to think about more what's your data, like the security lake architecture, and sort of bring this in and then doing some querying on top of that. But again, always focus on something that auditors can use and understand and consume in the end. Yeah,
I mean, love that you mentioned application security posture management platforms or services, right? All of the major security vendors will have their version of it. I know CrowdStrike has one, Aikido, so I think they give us a blueprint, right? You tell my clients basically that when I was an undergrad, one of my favorite phrases that I learned was, good designers copy, great designers steal. So they've given us kind of a blueprint approach to what are these ASPM products kind of trying to solve for, right? And then super high level kind of steps that you could take to kind of build your own. And Dan touched on some of this, but how can you recreate an ASPM from either open source or in-house tooling, right? So you want to collect the signals, right? Which is what these platforms are doing. There's too much noise, and you want to get the signals coming in. So a webhook that sends every code scan result, build status, and deploy event to one message queue, right? So GitHub, webhook, RabbitMQ, or Danny mentioned the cloud providers like an AWS, SNS, or something along those lines. Why does that matter? What does it start to give you in the first step? All evidence goes to one immutable place, right? Second step, store it once. You can append object store with day stamped folders. Again, you can do this in an S3 bucket or a GCS bucket with a write once policy. The immutability of those raw artifacts mean that they're going to enable you to have a successful audit, at least from that perspective. Tag the controls, right? So we just mentioned ISO, but pick your framework, pick your regulatory requirements that apply to your industry. and you can, tag with maybe control ID like ISO 14.2.1 or one of the NIST RMF controls to each event. And to do that, write a bit of Python. You can use the JSON again to touch on that format and that file type, and that turns raw logs into a framework mapped proof. I'm referring to my notes here if you can't tell. And the second to last step, so the policy engine, and we talked about like the open port policies, but more rules that you could bake into this. Block merge if it's a critical vulnerability. If the SBOM's not attached or missing, fire off an alert. You could do that with a few if statements in YAML. And these policies then become kind of self-enforcing. You don't have to have the AppSec chasing behind the engineering team to make sure this is happening. Again, this touches on what we said before. It's built into their pipeline. And then finally, there's lots of great tools out there that are either free or inexpensive, like putting together a dashboard, producing all of the stuff that we just put together. I've used Grafana in the past, but basically, or even Excel, if you wanted to go through this, you could put together something that lets you put this stuff together and make it presentable to leadership. So use the existing ASPM platforms as a model of how can we build that in-house with either open source or in-house tools.
Okay, fantastic. We are reaching the end of the session. So probably we have mentioned, several things are clear. Things that we have to consider. We have the policies. We have to ensure that we have the policies to check everything. We have to ensure that the vulnerabilities and risk are tracked in the system that we want to implement. And the controls are mapped to the different things. Someone has to check the results and these things. So at the end, we have a clear mapping, this inventory that Andres mentioned at the beginning. So we have the knowledge of all the things that we have to monitor and to assess, and we know how to measure that point. We have the automation for generating the evidence and the different things that we have to store. And then we have the responsibilities across the different teams to know. You have to solve, you have to monitor, you have to ensure that everything is properly implemented, and we have this program, this view. But at the end, in the practice, based on the huge number of projects and deployments that you have implemented for our audience, things that has work always, or do you think that has the most probability of success, doing the things in a specific way, or doing things that are going to work in the practice, or just a couple of ideas or experience from your point of
view? Maybe I'll start this one, Dan, and I'll try to be a little brief, and I just I'm going to make it AppSec relevant, but I worked with a client to build their security kind of governance program from the ground up. So a semblance of some policy documents and controls in place, but incomplete and needed to be built out. Among the requirements that they wanted to offer this as a service, it's a cybersecurity startup that wanted to be able to do kind of a program management / be able to offer this as a compliance service to their end customers. Start at the highest possible level, right? Your clients are going to have frameworks which establish kind of industry best practices from pick your security domain, right? We'll use AppSec because it's relevant to this conversation, right? What are the AppSec things that I should be doing according to industry frameworks? Your NISTs, your ISOs, your kind of pick your flavor. And then dependent on industry or dependent on country or region, what do I have to do? It's not a should, it's I'm mandated to do these. Maybe I'm mandated to treat data in a certain way or have certain protection controls. And it's about collecting those sources. We're going to use, we used NIST in the cybersecurity framework. and we have to worry about HIPAA, which is a data privacy, a U.S. data privacy regulation, and has specifics on how personal health information, so data related to patient health, is managed and protected in the United States. And you do a control crosswalk. What does the framework say that I should be doing? What does the regulation say that I have to do, that I must do? And how can I author controls from an AppSec perspective that meet the intent of the regulations and align to the industry best practices? And that gives you a control catalog, which you can identify. You can assign a unique identifier, whether that be you go with whatever the framework already has in place, or you create a unique kind of a proprietary identifier, so it's always referenceable. You add that to your GRC kind of policy storage, so you always have a way of knowing what control aligns to what requirement. And that way you can walk an auditor through. And not just an auditor, you can walk your teams, you can walk whoever wants to know the process by which you said, okay, I was an industry best practice says that I need to do AppSec testing on an annual basis or an X basis. HIPAA says that it needs to be done every 7 months or every 12 months or something along those lines. So I can say that I'm aligned to NIST and best practices by having a control that says, you must do SAST, SCA, DAST, pen testing, whatever your organization requires on a 7-month basis. I know that I'm now covered for HIPAA because I'm aligning to the regulatory requirement, and I'm in line with industry best practices, whether that be NIST or ISO. And I can tell that story, and then we can have you can tie it to the rest of the conversation we've just had about how, okay, what evidence do you have in place that shows me that you're periodically testing this on a 7-month, 12-month basis? And that's the story. That's the goal. That's the narrative, is to be able to kind of build that program out using these sometimes Byzantine arrangements of regulatory requirements and industry best practices. I think that's what if we can simplify that for clients or for engineering teams or for leadership, I think you really give yourself a fighting chance to pass an audit, or even just to explain why security is important into the organization.
And just to touch on Anders, what you said also, we call it like the clear control mapping. It's an awful word, mapping. It's like what auditors love, just understand what actually is the sort of regulatory guidance versus then the technical implementation. And what we did actually in one of the Swiss insurance companies that I work with is sort of establish the level of flight. So basically you have ISO 27001 as a metric 100%, is very high level, right? And then you go into NIST, which is more like 40 or 50. DORA again, probably more like around 90 or even same as 100, right? And then you have like the CIS, the Center for Information Security benchmark, is a very low level implementation. And you sort of try to find and understand which guidelines are relevant and how do actually those map between those different levels, right? And making sure that actually that's understood. You know, it's a thing that all the time, it's all done for you, but actually you have to really think about your internal policies and controls. Another thing I just like to ensure is like some mistakes. So treating compliance as basically a one-time project or a checkbox exercise, because quite often that's not going to work out a long term. That might pass you one audit 1 year, but going forward, even coming as an auditor background, you always look into making sure that this is actually consistent, especially there's like things like SOC 2 type of reports where they actually look at the long-term health of the organization. Actually, can they meet those controls? So one thing that's very helpful is self-assessments, right? So go and look at like be your own auditor, right? Do some internal compliance or assessment. I don't know the word compliance, but internal assessment programs. Don't even call it audit because it just sounds like too much effort and work. But actually, just focus on certain domain and using this as a sort of a regulatory, basically like an exercise to meet or pass an audit. And again, just focusing on automation and continuous monitoring. So if you can always prove in real time that you're compliant. It makes it so much easier for an audit to come in and just say, oh, yeah, that looks good. I'm happy with that. So I've seen an enterprise that will set up like automatic weekly reports on key metrics, like critical vulnerabilities that are open, coverage of code reviews, things like that, from all those different systems just into that central visibility, like dashboard. So they always knew where they stood against those requirements. Then map back to the kind of like the level of the requirement you're talking about, right? Because they can be very high level, very ambiguous, especially with DORA or ISO 27001. So this made actually an assessment just more formality, like instead of a heavy exercise, because we're already doing this internally, the assessment. So I think that quite helped a lot, just to focus on, it's not just a checkbox. It's something developers embrace to actually be compliant and actually reduce friction and show that products are trustworthy. I think this is in the end what you want to get, especially with the CRA, having this sort of as a stood out.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andres. Dan, I think we are almost at the end of the session. Just to finish, we have covered a lot of topics, from generating some tips and some experience to implement it and everything. I think what is clear is that passing an audit or is not just to have all the papers and everything. So we need more things, and we have to prepare during the previous time to have everything ready and to demonstrate that we covered everything. Beyond this experience and these recommendations, just to finish, you have to recommend some takeaways for the audience. One, the most relevant things, just for the first step towards implementing this. What are your recommendations for the audience? These two tips or two important takeaways to start.
Try to say it in 30 seconds or less, which is it's all about ownership. So ensure that assign responsibility. Pick a tech owner on the engineering side and a risk owner on the leadership side. And these are now two accountable individuals for. Start small. Do a pilot with a service or an application within the enterprise. It doesn't have to be one of the mission critical ones, but it could be. And if you're not able to pass an audit, then it is. I'll put my neck out there and say it's an indictment of your ability to be able to explain the actual engineering processes and the business processes in what is being audited, because those things should work hand in hand.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andres.
And from my side, so I think just to just also touch what Andres said. So roles, responsibilities, and actually having this assigned. Actually, also having the cross-team alignment and the common understanding between the teams, what's expected, and sort of having basically a central visibility in place. One thing I would though suggest just for the audience, just to how to become more auditable or how to increase your maturity is pick only one high impact control and try to automate the heck out of it. Like really focusing on finding that painful thing that you've seen a lot. So basically you're not collecting evidence of code reviews, right? So implement a code review role that doesn't allow any merge without a pull request approval. And have something like a log, let's talk about standardized log that actually shows it. So just focus on that and blueprint. Have this as a sort of a blueprint for your, call it like a service catalog of your DevSecOps practices that you can use. So again, just one good example, and you can scale this up. I think that's actually one task to focus on as a takeaway.
Thank you very much, Dan. Also, I think you more or less agree on at the end everything is about the people, ownership, and align the people and change the mindset of the people. And this exercise, Dan, that you propose, that focus on one thing and apply the stop the build, stop everything in just this sample. Yeah. This is a very good exercise to change the mindset of the team and to start thinking on that approach. This Very, very good recommendation.
Start easy,
I
right?
like it.
So
I
you
like
don't want
it.
to
Yeah.
boil the ocean, right? I think
But
that's
is the mindset of the engineering, the developers, and the C-level or the management level that Andres mentioned before also, because okay, I have this risk or this potential delay in the thing. So it's a good exercise to align everything. I just received a question. Okay, is what's one application security control that the teams usually or would think that is in place and is implemented properly, but when the auditor or the assessment review it, it fails?
Yeah.
What do you think that is the reason of this gap between the understanding of the team and the people in charge of the assessment?
Well, I go on because I come from the trenches working as an auditor, and especially in Germany, you have the regulatory requirements for minimal risk or minimal requirements of risk, and one thing is separation of duties in change management.
Yeah.
On paper, and it's like those companies like that we have on paper, we do segregation of duties or separation of duties. Of course, we require separate approvals for code deployments, but actually, when you do check it, when you sit down with the person, application owner, it turns out it's often the same person because maybe it's the staff. There's one guy who just writes, reviews, and deploys all the code. Especially if you're talking in fast moving environments where it's like, oh, we just need to release this tiny change to the system. So seeing this a lot in financial institutions that I went through audits, is that we're really creating a major issue here. So what helps is embedding automated enforcement. So again, even though you have only one guy who can actually approve this, configure like your CI/CD, like things like GitHub, to require at least one additional approval, and it might be someone from another team or the line manager, as long as we comply with it. So I think this is quite often makes it impossible for one person to just push alone and approve. Even like in emergency change, you still have that evidence in place that you need to go through that process. And ensure actually that's been documented. Again, separation of duties, change management, it's a thing that always comes up. It's like, oh yeah, it's on paper, but actually it's not in the system. Because quite often roles are complex, like role-based access controls, and you have the important individual who's doing it, knows everything, knows all the changes. But again, that's where automation comes in as the magic, just ensuring that's enforced, right? Andres, what's your take?
Do you want to add anything? Or?
Yeah, well, I'll give my own. It probably will make Dan chuckle because he's been in the trenches, but like, a foundational AppSec testing control, right? We test using these tools, and it's in place and established throughout the organization. Great, that's fabulous. And the auditor goes to pick an asset to ensure that they've gotten their SAST and SCA test for the year or on a release-based basis, and there's no test for it. Why is there no test for it? Oh, because it's out of scope. Okay, well, where have you defined your scope for your in-scope assets for your AppSec program? Oh, we don't have such a thing because we don't have an asset inventory or something. Just something really silly and kind of like chuckle-inducing, but you run into that kind of stuff where you're like, my control says I have to test all my assets. Okay, and then the auditor picks one asset that is not in scope and your whole story falls apart. And now you're answering questions on, well, why is this foundational AppSec control not being met by this asset? And it's because, because we didn't define our scope for what is in scope for testing, what's not. So.
Okay.
Not the first time I hear this. It's like, as an auditor, you have to ask the right questions. And it's like, why? And then you keep going. It's like, because you never really thought about doing this, right? So, good point.
Yeah, good point. Now, yes, Dan, Andres, thank you very much for you both for everything and for you have shared today here. I think your experience.
Thank you.
Your experience in these enterprise transformations to hands-on advisor and to brought a lot of clarity and to this space that can feel a bit abstract and overwhelming when you are new on it. Today's session, I think, really showed is that application security compliance is more challenging and has become a shared responsibility across all the team, all the company. It's not just a concern or a responsibility of the audit team or the GRC team. Is involve everybody, developers, DevSecOps, and everything. It's a system, as Andres introduced at the beginning, where we have the security controls embedded in the early stages from the beginning. Everything is generated automatically. Everyone is involved and in the same page, from developer, security, risk management, everything. The frameworks are not going to go away. In the best case, are going to evolve and to be more specific, more demanding, and putting more things in our site. So let's try to make or to create an opportunity to take benefit of these recommendations, this framework, to build stronger systems, to be more secure, to close these visibility gaps regarding inventory, for example, and these kind of things. And let's try to turn the audits into a proof points instead of a pain points. Okay, so everybody who joined today, thank you for investing this hour with us today. I hope you are walking away with new tactics, new tips, new perspectives, and at least one thing you can apply next week or in the next quarter. Okay, so thank you, everybody, and see you in the next segment.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.